Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up and working with our gear cut feature, working with a sequential transmission and a gear barrel position sensor. This is something we have as a unique strategy for our programming with our Link G5 and G4X systems. So we definitely want to understand how this works. Now, this is going to be differing from the last few tutorials talking about controlling and working with shift cut for sequential transmission, where we had a strain gauge that would be reporting how much shift lever force that's going to request or an up or down shift. Now we're not looking at a strain gauge. We're looking at a gear barrel position sensor, which is essentially translating what we're doing when we're requesting a shift to happen, whether it's going to be an up or a down shift and what specific gear we're going into. This is definitely the ideal way to control things with a sequential transmission. If your sequential transmission offers that gear position sensor that we can wire into the Link so it can report all this. We're going to take a look at setting up a gear barrel position sensor in the programming and then talk about the strategy from start to finish. There's a lot of details here, so we want to cover as much as possible. Let's jump from our fuel page and let's go over now into our shift cut pages that's specific for a sequential transmission. Let's go here in our layout. We're going to use our drop down because we have so many pages here. And we see we have our sequential up and sequential downshift. Now I've split these pages up here for an upshift request and a downshift request because there's tables that are specific for up and downshifting. Now the way that the software is set up here currently, it can get really confusing because the tables aren't labeled upshift specific or downshift specific. So I set these pages up so we kind of have these split apart, and we'll talk about what these all mean here in the beginning of the tutorial so it makes better sense of doing the programming for the tables. Let's go into our sequential upshift request. This is going to be where we're going to start off our tutorial here. If we scroll across here to the right, we're going to find our sequential downshift request. So this is upshift, downshift, and again, our tables here are set up in a very specific fashion. Let's go here to our sequential shift up or upshift request, and let's talk about setting this up now. So we're going to go here to our gear shift control. Start shift mode, we're going to go from off, and in this case, we're going to select gear barrel position. We are not selecting gear lever force using a strain gauge for the sequential option, gear barrel position. So this is assuming that you have a sequential transmission and you have a gear barrel position sensor that you can wire into the Link. Okay, let's click OK here. And the end shift mode, we can use time as an option, but the ideal thing to do here is use gear barrel position. Now, when we do this, it opens up a couple more tables for programming. The reason why we want to work with the gear barrel position to report the beginning of the shift and the end of the shift is because when we're actually making that shift happen, there's going to be a beginning and an end. When we're reporting that we're in the next gear, we no longer need the shift cut active. We can completely bypass it. So by using the end shift mode as gear barrel position, if the position sensor is reporting you're in the next gear, we can terminate the shift and we can move right into our torque reintroduction duration here and ramp back in any spark retard and ramp back any spark or fuel cut that you have enabled. So this will make a little bit more sense as we talk through this, but that's what we're going to go through in this tutorial. Let's talk about a few things here with our page layout. So these make a little bit more sense as we're heading into the tutorial. So you're going to find here that we have tables that are right on the left side and tables here that are on the right side. In between, we have our parameters list, and then we have our time plot down here that we can take a look at, reviewing how the shift cut is working. Now, let's scroll down here in our page, in our gear shift control window. We're going to find we have driven upshift, driven downshift, overrun upshift, overrun downshift. The way I've set this up, because we're in the upshift request, everything here to the left in terms of our tables for programming is related to our driven upshift. So things on the left are driven upshift. Then things on the right side here are going to be related to our overrun upshift. Now, what's the difference here? The driven upshift means that we're under power. The overrun upshift means that we're in lift throttle overrun conditions. So we're at very light throttle or completely lift throttle, and it's going to require different tables and different programming in either situation. So when we're under power using a driven upshift request, we typically need to get a little bit more aggressive with the way we're cutting spark and we're pulling out ignition timing so that we can soften up the shift and allow the dogs to line up to each other a little bit better and then engage properly without crashing to each other. If we're in overrun, we typically don't need to get as aggressive. So we'll find here some of our settings here can be set completely different in terms of the upshift request under power and then the upshift request in lift throttle overrun. All right, now how do we find ourselves between driven and overrun? That's going to be specified here if we just go up, and I hate to skip around, but we're just going to talk about this briefly and we'll just go down this list again. Looking at this, we have a drive, overrun, TPS, APS, and then we have our source. This is going to be taking a look at either the throttle position or accel pedal position. In my case, I'm drive-by-wire, so I would select accel pedal position. This is saying 3% throttle and less. We'll be using the overrun upshift request tables. 3% throttle and higher, we're going to be considered to then be under power, and we're going to use our driven upshift request. So this is essentially the filter that puts us either in the overrun or the upshift driven request. Then we also have upshift, TPS, APS, low lockout. This is saying here we have to be of this percentage of throttle in order for any of the tables to actually be in play, to be able to do any kind of cut effect or ignition retard to soften up the shift. I usually make these the same. So this is saying 3% throttle and higher. We want to have our tables here applied. 3% throttle and less, then we're not going to apply any of these tables. And that makes sense because then we're considered to be an overrun. So real quickly here, I'm going to set this to APS for the upshift lockout source, and then the drive overrun source, we're going to set this also to APS. I'm drive-by-wire, so I'm going to use my accel pedal position sensor. That's a better way to track the driven or overrun upshift request. And then again, we've set our percentages right here. Now let's just quickly jump into our sequential downshift and talk about this window. If we scroll down here, we're going to find driven downshift and then overrun downshift. Now there's definitely a need to have both of these. So driven downshift again is going to be anything that's considered to be 3% throttle and higher. Let's say we're 20% throttle, we're in third gear, we want to go ahead and pull the lever and shift down to second gear. That's going to reference our tables right here. And then we also have to the right our tables. That's going to be associated to an overrun downshift. This is where we're in lift throttle conditions, and let's say we're just pulling on the ratchet, the lever, to be able to pull ourselves down in gear. It'll reference the tables over here on the right side. So that's going to be setting us up here for the tutorial, just understanding which tables apply to which specific section here. We don't have a way in the software, at least I'm not aware of, that we can group together tables and call them driven downshift or overrun downshift. So the best way I've came up with this is to separate this into two separate windows. Hopefully this all makes sense. Okay, so now that we understand what this all means, let's go in. The very first thing I want to do is set up our gear barrel position sensor. This is going to be a sensor that's typically 0 to 5 volt, and then in different positions, different gear positions, it's going to be sending out a different voltage. This is an excellent way to keep track of what gear we're in, and then it also enhances our shift cut strategy here with the link. So what I want to do here is first assign the source where I've wired in my gear barrel position sensor. Right now, I've set it here to analog voltage 4. There's a voltage tolerance, and this is saying this is how much tolerance it can have on each different gear position. So that's pretty simple. 0.1, 0.2 volts, pretty normal there for the voltage tolerance. And then we're going to find what gear, so that we can see gear A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then we see our voltages, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's also an H. That's going to be associated to the positions here. So gear A, the way my transmission's set up, it's going reverse, then neutral, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So I have a gear barrel position that can be read in all of my gear positions for my transmission. So I have a 6-speed sequential. Reverse is the very lowest position, then neutral's the next, and then I can just ratchet all the way up through the rest of the gears. So that's the way this is set up here. That's pretty standard for most sequentials. Sometimes you might find it kind of skip around here, but pretty standard here. So that's how my transmission's set up. Now, what I need to define is what voltage is associated to which gear position. So right now I'm in the neutral position on my transmission. You don't need to have the engine running to do this test. You just need to be able to shift through the gears, key on engine off to define what your voltage versus gear position is going to be established. So we're going to go here to tuning to runtime values. Let's go back in here. Sorry, I skipped ahead. Tuning, runtime values, and we're going to go here to our analog input window. What we want to see is the raw voltage coming in under the analog channel we've assigned for the gear barrel position sensor. In this case, we can see analog 4 gear position sensor, and I'm in the neutral position right now, so it's showing 0.45 volt associated to neutral position. I need to define that because neutral here is gear B. You see it right here. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.